When people talk about the roots of America today, they often talk about the Constitution, and we have classes on the Constitution and we have seminars on the Constitution. But the reality is, the Constitution is not the founding document of this country. How do we know? Because the Constitution tells us so. The Constitution begins with "we the people," but if you go all the way to the very end, right before the signature, you will see that it says that it was signed by unanimous consent of the states present, and the date, and the seventh, of the independence of the United States, the 12th year of our independence. So if 1787 is the 12th year of America's independence, that means America was 11 years and some months old. So let's take 1787 and subtract 11 years and some months. And where are we? We're in 1776. In fact, we're in July of 1776. The founding document of this country was not the Constitution. It wasn't even signed until we were 12 years old. The founding document of this country was the Declaration of Independence. That is the truth upon which America stands. So if we're going to talk about the founding of America, we need to examine what was said and what was offered in the Declaration. Now, the Declaration, as everyone knows, was actually written by Thomas Jefferson. But Mr. Jefferson was a very learned man, and he looked to folks from history to give him ideas and words and philosophies. One of the people he looked at was John Locke, who was a philosopher in England. One was George Mason, who was in Virginia, and one was Algernon Sidney, who was a Brit. Algernon Sidney's writings were based upon Robert Bellarmine, whom we talked about in our last segment. Each of those gentlemen gave philosophies and words that Mr. Jefferson incorporated into the Declaration of Independence, but he put them all together in one piece to create a philosophy of government that really had never been seen before, and it's one upon which America has now rested for more than 200 years. In the philosophy, he made an amazing assertion. The Virginia Declaration of Rights, and remember Mr. Jefferson was a Virginian, said that men by nature are free and independent. But when Mr. Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence for the nation, he said that men were endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. That immediately changed our status. It said we are not subjects. It said we don't belong to any government. We, each of us, are created beings. And because we are created beings, we have rights that go beyond the government. The question that is often asked is, well, did Mr. Jefferson actually mean to insert the word creator, or was it just a device in terms of making the language work? Thomas Jefferson only wrote one book. That book was called Notes on the State of Virginia. It was published in 1782. It's available in the Library of Congress. And what he said in that book, and I'm quoting, he said, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God, that they are not to be violated, but with his wrath." Mr. Jefferson, in fact, meant to insert the word creator and was doing something quite important when he did so. In effect, he was reasserting the sword of the church. Remember all the way back in the 400s when Pope Gelasius told the emperor, no, there are things beyond your reach. There is a limit to the authority of the government. Mr. Jefferson was saying that there is a limit to the authority of the state, and that within those limits, that right and wrong are more important than legal and illegal. Nobody asserted that what King George did was illegal. He was the king. Therefore, by definition, if he did it, it was legal. What the American colonies were asserting was that what King George was doing was wrong. He was asserting that there are absolute standards. Right and wrong doesn't move just depending on who's in power in the government that day. And he was asserting that there are absolutely legitimate limits on the power of the government, and that the rights that we have as created beings are outside of the purview of any government. Now, the sword of the church is words. It's not, this church doesn't have armies, the church doesn't have tanks, but the church does exert a moral authority. And so Mr. Jefferson was reasserting that, putting things back in the proper order in the very opening sentences of the Declaration. The sword of the state, well, it's a sword. The sword of the state is law enforcement and military power and financial authority. The sword of the state is very popular, very powerful. And Mr. Jefferson knew that. After all, his tradition was in England, where the crown had, in fact, grabbed the church and said, nope, we have both swords. And since the church only had words, they didn't have anything as powerful to stand against the state. And Mr. Jefferson knew that. So what he did was he created in the Declaration a sword for the people. It's interesting in the discussion, particularly today, because we live in a society that doesn't want to talk about the authority of God. What we're told is, well, it's the people. But you know, whenever there's a conflict between the government and citizens, it's never the people. It's always a person who is standing alone against the might of the state. And in every one of those cases, the person does not prevail. So Mr. Jefferson, in terms of looking at how those things come together, said we need to put things together in a way that creates two sides, hopefully to hold in the might of the state. And his response, his solution, was the document that we know of as the Declaration of Independence. It was signed in July of 1776. And what did they say? Well, it began with the words, when in the course of human events. The gentlemen who signed the Declaration, they weren't tearing a society down, they were building one. And they wanted to tell the world what they were doing and why they were doing it. He said, we hold these truths, that a healthy society must begin by embracing the truth, that something could be legal, but it's wrong, and being legal and wrong is not acceptable. And in the end, government has an obligation not just to do what is legal, but to do what is right. He said, people are created. We're not subjects. Each of us is created, precious and unique to the Creator. And because we are created beings, our rights flow from Him, not the government. And that no government can legitimately ignore that truth. Then they listed those rights. The right to exist, the right to be free, the right to become the person each of us was created to be. Those are fundamental. If a government can say that any individual or class of individuals doesn't even have the right to exist, then you don't have any rights. The right to be free, liberty, that's actually based in law. And it says everyone has to be accountable equally to the law. No one is above it and no one is below it. The right to be the person we were created to be, the pursuit of happiness, the right to our work, the right to our thoughts, the right to success, and sometimes to failure, because all of those things help us to be the person that our Creator made us to be. He said that government's only reason to exist is to protect the rights of the created beings who live within its jurisdiction. The limits on the government are defined by the endowed rights of the citizens. So government can never take away from you or attempt to take away from you something that God Himself gave to you. In Jefferson's system, God and then the people. And then the government is created by the people, instituted among men. The government belongs to the people. The people do not belong to the government. Government is only the instrument that the people create to protect the rights that the Creator gave us. In the end, government is answerable to the people and to God for its actions. He said that government only has the authority that the people consent to give us. Just because government wants more power doesn't mean it should have more power. And that government must live within the limits that the people set for it if it is to remain legitimate. Now, we all know government doesn't like to live within those limits. So Mr. Jefferson wrote right in the Declaration that we, the people, do not have to tolerate an unacceptable government, that because the government's only always accountable to us and to our Creator, if that government steps outside its limits or behaves in ways that are not appropriate or do not further the ends of securing the rights that we are given by God Himself, that we can legitimately change that government to protect those rights. That was the sword that Jefferson gave the people, the ability to change their government. In effect, Jefferson turned the two-sword theory into the three-sword theory: the church, the people, and the state. And in signing that document, Mr. Jefferson created a system of government that had never been seen before, and yet has remained intact for more than 200 years. This is a republic. It is the oldest existing republic that has remained stable throughout all of its existence. And we owe that fact to the wisdom of Mr. Jefferson in creating three swords, beginning with the Creator, who gives rights to the people, who created government to secure the rights, and stated that that government must remain accountable both to the people and to God Himself. I thank you so much for joining us. In our next segment, we're going to talk about how the United States first initiated an attempt to create a government that implemented the outline and the principles of the Declaration. Until then, I do invite you to visit us at Founded on Truth and take advantage of our resources there. There are several books for your enjoyment. The first is A Parent's Guide to Choosing a Reading Curriculum to help you make good decisions about the education of your children. The second is Love Mom, which is a book about the joy and beauty and wonder of being a parent. And the third one, the new one now, is called Mirror Image, which is a book that talks about the sanctity and the precious wonder of every human life based on my own personal story. I certainly hope you enjoy it. And until the next time, may the good Lord hold you in the palm of His hand.